My name is Ryan, and I need to get this out of my head before I start doubting it really happened. Last fall, I stayed alone in a cabin in the woods for a long weekend. It was supposed to be quiet and boring. It was neither. I walked out of there alive. But I still wake up some nights thinking I am back in that bedroom with someone standing just outside the door. I booked the place through a rental site. The listing made it sound peaceful and rustic. One bedroom, a small kitchen, a porch that looked out over Miller Creek, and nothing but forest all around. The nearest town was 20 minutes away. The listing bragged about the lack of neighbors and light pollution. That was what sold me. I had just gone through a breakup, and I thought a few days of hiking and reading with no one around would clear my head. My friends tried to talk me into going with them instead, somewhere with a bar and other people. I told them I needed quiet. I thought being alone would be easier than being around anyone. I got there late on a Thursday afternoon. The road turned from pavement to cracked gravel, then to packed dirt. My car crawled past a faded sign for Miller Creek Recreation Area, then another sign that just said Private Road in crooked letters. I kept going because the directions said to. There were no other houses in sight, just trees and a spike of radio tower way off in the distance. The cabin was smaller than it looked in the photos. Weathered boards, green porch, one small window in the front, and another on the side. The gravel drive was narrow and dead-ended right at the porch steps. There were no other cars, no tire tracks except the ones I made pulling in. The lockbox code worked. I remember feeling proud of myself as I swung the door open like I had done something brave just by getting there. Inside, it smelled like old wood and coffee. A couch, a tiny table, a kitchenette, and a short hallway that led to the bathroom and bedroom. There was a bookshelf with paperbacks and a little laminated sheet of house rules propped up beside a ceramic mug full of pens. I dropped my bag in the bedroom and noticed the first thing that bothered me. Someone else's toothbrush was sitting in a cup by the sink. There were two, actually. One green, one blue. For a second, I told myself the cleaner must have forgotten to throw them out. But the bristles were still upright and fluffy, not flattened like old ones. The blue toothbrush had a bead of dried toothpaste on it. The tube of toothpaste laying next to them was rolled halfway up and capped. I remember standing there with my own toothbrush in my hand and feeling weirdly embarrassed, like I had walked into someone's room by mistake. I checked the house rules. Check in 3 in the afternoon. Check out 11 in the morning. It was already close to 5. Whoever stayed before me should have been gone. I told myself I was being dramatic. I put my toothbrush in my bag instead of the cup and walked around the place. Every window was locked. The back door had a deadbolt. The closet held extra blankets and a vacuum. The fridge had 2 bottles of local beer and a note from the host that said "Enjoy" on me, written in neat block letters. There was nothing that screamed "someone else is here." Just that stupid toothbrushes thing that I could not stop thinking about. The first night was quiet. I ate a frozen pizza, cracked one of the beers, and read until the sun melted out behind the trees. There was no television, just a little radio and my phone. The service dropped to 1 bar and then nothing. I watched the signal icon search and fail a few times before I gave up and turned on the radio. Around 9, I heard a car on the dirt road outside. It was faint at first, just a low rolling sound that grew louder, then softer, then stopped. Headlights swept across the trees through the front window, then moved away. I walked to the window and pulled back the curtain a little. The road was empty. I expected to see taillights, but there was nothing. The sound of the engine faded into the distance. It was not strange for a car to pass. I told myself that. It still made me feel like I was on display. I locked the front door and checked the back door again. Both were already locked. I laughed at myself for being jumpy and went to bed around 11. Sometime after midnight, I woke up freezing. The cabin had electric heat, and I had set the little thermostat in the hallway before bed. When I got up and checked it, the readout said 61. The fan was running, but it felt like somebody had left a window open. I went room to room. Front window, locked. Kitchen window, locked. Bathroom window, locked. Then I reached the bedroom window, and my chest tightened. The latch was turned to open. The window was still down in the frame, but someone had twisted the lock. The metal was cold under my fingers. For a full minute, I just stood there with my hand on it, trying to decide if I had somehow done that and forgotten. I did not think I had even touched that window. It looked out over the side yard, toward the trees. Nothing but black emptiness and a slice of moonlight on leaves. I locked it again and pulled the blind all the way down. I did not sleep much after that. Every time the cabin creaked, I imagined footsteps on the porch. When I finally dozed off again, the sun was already lightening the sky. In the morning, I convinced myself it had to have been me. Maybe I had checked the window without remembering. Maybe the host had left it that way. It was easier to blame myself than picture someone standing outside in the dark, flipping the latch with their fingers while I slept. I made coffee, ate a stale bagel, and decided to go for a hike behind the cabin. There was a narrow path that led down to Miller Creek. The water moved slow and brown between rocks and fallen branches. I followed the path along the bank for about a mile. There was a point where the trees thinned out, and I could see another structure through the branches across the creek. Not a house, something smaller. A shed or a hunting blind elevated on posts. There was a scrap of blue tarp nailed to one side of it that flapped in the breeze. I stood there and watched it for a while. No movement, no smoke, no sign of anyone. I turned around and headed back to the cabin. When I came out of the trees into the clearing around the cabin, my stomach dropped. There were fresh footprints in the dirt by the porch steps. They were clear because it had rained that morning. There were my footprints leading to the path. Another set circled the cabin. They came up from the driveway, went around the side, passed under the bedroom window, and disappeared into the woods toward the direction of that shed. I checked the doors. Both were still locked. The windows seemed untouched. I walked around and followed the tracks to the best of my ability until they blended into harder ground and leaves. They were bigger than my own and deeper. That was the first moment I thought about leaving. Instead, I sent a message to the host while I still had service, standing in the driveway with my phone held up like I was trying to catch a signal from the sky. I wrote, "Hey, quick question. Is there anyone else who uses the property, neighbors or groundskeepers I should know about?" 2 minutes later, the reception dropped to nothing again before a reply came in. I spent the rest of the day trying to pretend I was not waiting for a response. I made lunch, read on the porch, took another walk, this time only around the clearing. Every few minutes, I turned back to scan the tree line. Near dusk, my phone buzzed with a delayed notification. The message said, "No one should be around during your stay. There is another old hunting shack across the creek, but we do not own that. Everything okay?" I stared at the message and deleted the draft I had started that said someone is walking around out here. I did not have proof. I had footprints and a window latch. It felt thin. I did not want them to think I was some nervous city guest. I typed back, "All good. Just heard a truck last night and wondered if anyone else came down this road." No reply. Either it did not go through, or they were busy. The sun sank and the woods went from gold to gray to black. I locked the doors and turned on every light inside. The cabin looked smaller and stranger when fully lit, like there were not enough corners for the shadows, so they gathered in long piles in the hallway and under the table. Around 9, the car came back. I heard it before I saw it. That same slow crunch of tires on dirt. The engine sounded close, then it cut off. No doors, no voices. I stepped to the front window and looked out between the curtains. The road was empty again, but I could see a faint glow through the trees to the right. A pair of headlights pointed in toward the forest instead of the road. Whoever it was had pulled off into a narrow break in the brush, where I had not noticed a path before. I went cold all over. They had done this before. That was why there were no tire tracks in the drive. Whoever it was knew where they could tuck a vehicle out of sight. I killed the front room light and crouched by the window. At first there was nothing. Then I saw a shape moving between the trunks. A figure, just a little darker than the space around it, moving slowly toward the clearing. He stopped just at the tree line and stood there. I could not see his face. He was in a dark jacket and a hat with the bill low, hands at his sides. He did not move like someone who was lost. He did not take in the cabin like a hiker stumbling on something. He stood like someone who already knew every inch of what he was looking at. For a moment, I thought about turning on the porch light, making it obvious that I saw him. Instead, I froze. We stayed like that for a long time, me behind the curtain, him at the edge of the trees. Then, slowly, his head tilted just enough that I knew he was looking directly at the front window. I stumbled back from the glass without meaning to, and knocked against the little table. The ceramic mug full of pens clattered sideways. I grabbed it before it hit the floor, but one of the pens rolled away, rattling against the wood. It was a tiny noise, but in that place it felt loud as a shout. When I looked back at the window, he was gone. I did not hear footsteps. I did not hear the car. 1 second he was there. The next, the trees held nothing but darkness. My heart hammered in my chest so hard it made my vision swim. My phone had one thin gray bar of service when I checked it. I dialed 911 anyway. The call did not go through. It hung there, with connecting on the screen, and then dropped. The logical part of my brain told me I should pack my bag, get in my car, and drive out. The rest of me pictured my headlights sweeping across a man standing in the middle of the narrow drive, or a truck blocking the road just out of sight. So I stayed inside. I locked and relocked the doors until my fingers hurt. I dragged the small table and one of the chairs in front of the bedroom door like that would help. I lay on the bed fully dressed, with my shoes on. I thumbed 911 into my phone and left it there, ready to hit the call button if the service came back. Every sound seemed important. The hum of the fridge, the wind slipping around the cabin, a soft tap that could have been a branch or something else. Around midnight, there was a distinct scrape along the back wall, slow, like something metal brushed the siding. I held my breath. It came again, closer to the bedroom window this time. A faint slide and bump under the sill. I could not bring myself to pull up the blind. In my head, I saw a face pressed to the glass, pale in the moonlight, eyes level with mine. Instead, I stayed in the bed with my back against the wall and stared at the door. The little chair and table sat in front of it like a joke. The scrape stopped. For a few minutes there was nothing. Then the floorboards just outside the bedroom door creaked. The wait was deliberate. One slow step, then another. They paused right outside, like whoever it was listening. My phone screen lit up in my hand with a faint bump of signal. 0 bars, then 1. I pressed call. The number dialed. The ringing sound piped into my ear far too loud. The floor outside the door went silent. The dispatcher answered on the second ring. I whispered my name, the address on the rental listing, the fact that someone was in the cabin. She asked where I was. I said in the bedroom. She told me to stay on the line. I did. The signal flickered, held, wavered. She asked if I could lock the bedroom door. I said there was no lock. The best I could do was push the bed against it. She told me not to make any more noise. For a long stretch there was nothing but my breathing and some faint static. No footsteps, no scrape, no voice from the other side of the door. The dispatcher kept talking in a calm tone I tried to focus on. She said deputies were on their way from town. It took 14 minutes for them to get there. I know because the dispatcher kept giving me time checks. Around the 10-minute mark, the front porch boards creaked. Someone had been inside and was now leaving. I heard the deadbolt on the front door click. I had not unlocked it. The door opened. There was a pause. Then it closed again with a soft thud. I listened to that sound like it was the end of the world. When the deputies arrived, their lights washed the walls of the bedroom in blue through the blinds. They announced themselves. I moved the table and chair and opened the door with my hands shaking. They swept the cabin, front to back. Their boots were heavy and professional. No one else was inside. One of them stepped out to walk the property while the other stayed with me in the kitchen. The one outside came back 10 minutes later with his jaw tight. He had followed tracks from the back steps to the tree line. They led to a narrow trail through the woods where a pickup truck had been parked, out of sight from the cabin. The tracks headed toward the creek and that old shack on the other side. They stopped at the water. They asked me if anything was missing. I told them I did not know. Everything looked the same until I went to the bedroom. My bag had been unzipped. My clean clothes were folded neatly beside it on the floor. The book I had been reading was on the nightstand, open to a page I had not reached yet. A small spiral notebook I did not recognize sat next to it. The notebook held a list written in cramped handwriting. It said things like Thursday night, watched him check locks. Friday morning, left by back path. Friday evening, front window. Under the last entry, from the moment when I knocked the mug full of pens, it simply said, knows now. The deputies bagged the notebook and took statements. They told me anything that looked like a personal item should be photographed before I touched it. That was when I remembered the toothbrushes. When we checked the bathroom, the cup by the sink was empty. There were no toothbrushes at all. Not mine, not anyone else's. I left with the deputies that night. They followed me all the way back to town. I checked into a motel by the highway, where the traffic noise never stopped. I did not sleep, but I felt better hearing other engines instead of one hidden in the woods. The sheriff called me a week later. They had gone back out. The notebook did not have a name in it. The shack across the creek was empty, but clearly used. A mattress, some food wrappers, a pair of binoculars on the windowsill. They were pointed at the cabin. They never caught anyone. Or if they did, they never told me. To this day, I do not know how many nights someone was out there watching. I do not know if that was the first time he came into the cabin or just the first time I noticed. I do know that those toothbrushes had not been there by accident. Sometimes, in the quiet part of the night, I think about that hand turning the bedroom window latch while I slept. How easy it would have been to slide it up just an inch at a time, to listen to my breathing through the screen and decide whether to come in now or wait until the next guest. I used to love the idea of a cabin in the woods. Now when my friends send listings for fun, I block them. The photos all look the same. Warm wood, big windows, dark trees pressed close on every side. And all I can think about is what you cannot see in the pictures. The little worn path behind the house. The marks on the sill where a tool scraped the paint. The set of footprints under the window that are not yours. My name is Brandon, and the cabin I am going to tell you about still shows up on rental sites if you search hard enough. The photos are the same ones that drew me in. Wide porch, dark pine trees, a lake behind it with a dock that looks silver in the sunset. It looks like the kind of place where nothing worse than a spider or a raccoon could bother you. I know better now. I booked Pine Hollow in early October. I was 31, burned out from my job at a warehouse, and still trying to figure out who I was after my dad passed. He used to talk about renting a cabin and fishing for a week with no distractions. I kept thinking about that after the funeral. When a coworker mentioned this place, said his cousin had stayed there and loved it, I went home that night and reserved a 3-night weekend without thinking it through. It was about 3 hours from the city. The highway turned into a 2-lane road with fewer houses every mile, then into a narrow road that followed the curve of a lake. The trees were already red and gold. The directions from the owner were detailed. There was a faded sign where I had to turn, then a dirt road, then a left at the fork where the trees leaned over like a tunnel. I passed one other cabin that looked abandoned and run down, boards over the windows, moss on the roof. Pine Hollow was farther in, set back from the road with a gravel loop for parking. It was quieter than I expected. No boats on the lake, no other cars, just the sound of wind moving through trees and my own tires crunching on gravel. The cabin door had a keypad lock with a 4-digit code the owner sent in a message. I grabbed my bag, entered the code, and the lock clicked open with a little electric whine that made me feel oddly exposed, like I had just announced myself. Inside it was nicer than the pictures. Living room with a couch and chair, stone fireplace, kitchen with real appliances instead of a hot plate. Down a short hall was a bathroom and a single bedroom with a queen bed. There was a stack of extra blankets on a chair and a space heater in the corner in case it got cold at night. On the coffee table, there was an old-fashioned guest book with a ballpoint pen tied to it with yarn. I flipped through the pages out of habit. Most entries were simple. Great stay. Loved the lake. We will be back. Families had signed with kids, scribbling their names under their parents. I smiled at a note from a couple who wrote that they got engaged on the dock. The last completed entry was from late August, about 6 weeks before my trip. It said, nice cabin, beautiful view, Lots of stars. Under that, on the next line, there was a date from mid-September and one short sentence that trailed off. It said, "Do not stay here," and then the pen had dragged hard across the paper like it had been yanked away. There was no name under it. I told myself some teenager was trying to be edgy. I closed the book and set it down. The weird feeling stuck, though. That line looked different from the other cheerful comments. The letters were pressed into the paper hard enough that I could feel the grooves if I ran my thumb over them. During the daylight, the place felt normal. I carried my bag into the bedroom, opened the curtains, and checked the windows. All closed, latches turned. The view from the bedroom looked out toward the side yard and a line of trees. The lake was on the other side of the cabin, past the living room and a small deck. I walked down to the water and stood on the dock. The surface of the lake was almost perfectly still and clear. I could see fallen leaves floating near the shore and my own reflection wobbling when a breeze moved the surface. On my way back to the cabin, I noticed a second path I had not seen before. It was narrow, just dirt and flattened grass, leading around the side of the cabin toward the back. It looked used enough that there were no weeds in the center. For some reason, that bothered me more than it should have. The driveway and front walk were clear because guests used them. The little trail did not seem like something you would put in the listing photos. I walked a few steps down it and saw that it curved behind the cabin toward the crawlspace access. The crawlspace door was a low wooden panel set into the foundation, about 3 feet high. It had a padlock through a metal loop. The padlock was closed, but the loop on the door side looked bent, like someone had tried to pry it before. There were faint marks in the wood where a tool had dug in. The ground around it was scuffed, leaves pushed aside. It might have all been old, I told myself, from some repair years ago. The dates on the padlock looked newer than the wood around it. By late afternoon, clouds had rolled in over the lake. The cabin got dimmer faster than I expected. I made some dinner, put my phone on the charger, and tried to stream music. There was no service. The owner had warned that in the listing, but it still annoyed me. The radio on the windowsill only picked up one station very faintly, some old country song sliding in and out of static. I ended up turning it off and listening to the quiet. Around 8, it started to rain. Not a heavy storm, just steady drops tapping on the roof and leaves. It made the place feel more isolated. The windows showed nothing but reflected lamplight and black outside. I remembered the last words in the guest book and had to force myself not to go pick it up again. I went to bed around 11. I locked the front door, double-checked the back door, and turned off lights until only the bedroom lamp was on. The bed was softer than I expected. For a while I lay there, listening to the rain and my own breathing. At some point, I fell asleep. The first thing that woke me was a light. I felt it before I opened my eyes. A dim gray glow on my eyelids that did not match the warm lamp I had turned off. When I blinked awake, I saw a pale rectangle on the wall opposite the bed. It was moving slowly, a faint shifting beam that grew brighter and then softer again. It took my brain a few seconds to understand what I was seeing. Headlights, filtering into the bedroom from somewhere outside, passing between trees. I rolled as quietly as I could to the edge of the bed and grabbed my phone off the nightstand. The screen said 2:14 in the morning. No service. The headlights swept across the wall again, then paused long enough that I knew the vehicle had stopped somewhere. The bedroom did not have a view of the driveway. The window looked toward the side. Whoever was out there had pulled in and then either backed up or turned. I slid off the bed, heart pounding, and crouched down. The floor felt cold under my bare feet. I stepped around the end of the bed and reached for the curtain cord with my hands shaking. I moved the curtain a half-inch. Through the gap, I could see the side yard and a slice of the driveway where it curved around the cabin. The headlights were off now. The rain had slowed to a mist, and the gravel glistened. There was a dark shape where the driveway met the trees. A vehicle, I thought. Then I saw a figure step away from it. The person was in a hooded jacket, the hood up. I could not see their face. They moved with this strange calm, walking along the edge of the trees, instead of coming straight to the front door. They passed out of view of my window, heading toward the back of the cabin. For a second, I thought, maybe the owner sent someone to check on something. Maybe it was a late arrival for some other place, though I knew Pine Hollow was alone at the end of the road. Then my mind jumped to the crawlspace door and the little path. I backed away from the window and listened. The cabin settled and creaked like old wood does. I heard the faint patter of drops from the last of the rain. Under that, after a minute, there was a different sound, a dull thump from the floor somewhere under the bedroom, then another. Someone was moving beneath the cabin. I grabbed the space heater from the corner and unplugged it. It was the heaviest thing I could lift easily. For a second, I pictured myself trying to swing it at a stranger. The image did not make me feel strong. It made me feel pathetic and underprepared. But it was all I had. The thumps continued, closer now. Then I heard a metallic clink, like a chain moving, and a soft scraping sound that made my teeth hurt. The crawlspace door, I thought. The padlock loop with the bend. The scraping grew louder, then stopped, followed by a muffled grunt. Whoever it was had either opened it or given up. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. I stood in the dark bedroom with my back against the wall and the heater cord wrapped in my fist, waiting for something. I kept glancing at the doorknob like it might start turning. Instead, the next sound came from the living room. A faint click, like a light switch. I saw a glow spill under the bedroom door, a warm rectangle of light stretching across the floor. That meant the front door had opened at some point without me hearing it, and someone was now inside my cabin, moving around like they belonged there. My first instinct was to yell, to call out and pretend I was not terrified, ask who it was, demand they leave. But something in the way they were moving, so deliberate and unhurried, made me hold my breath instead. The light under the door brightened and darkened as they passed in front of it. There was a soft scrape as something was dragged along the floor. The coffee table maybe. A drawer sliding open. I heard paper rustle. The guest book, I thought. I realized with a sick feeling that if this person had been here before, they would know the layout. They would know there was no lock on the bedroom door. My phone still showed no bars. I opened the emergency call screen anyway and hovered my thumb over the button. If the signal flickered back for even a second, I wanted to be ready. I stared at the tiny icon and tried to listen through the pounding in my ears. The footsteps came down the hall. Slow, measured. They stopped just outside the bedroom door. The light under the door was blocked by a shadow. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, calmly, the knob began to turn. I do not know what made me move. Maybe it was anger cutting through the fear. Maybe it was the thought of someone standing over me in the dark if I kept pretending to be asleep. I stepped forward and shoved my shoulder into the door at the same time as they tried to pull it inward. The door slammed shut with a sharp crack, and the impact drove a grunt out of whoever was on the other side. The knob jerked hard in my hand. We stood there like that, me braced and shoving forward, them pulling. The heater was too awkward to use as a weapon while I was leaning into the door, so it just sat at my feet like a useless metal pet. My heart hammered and my legs shook. The person outside did not shout or threaten. They said nothing at all. After what felt like hours, but was probably 20 seconds, the pressure on the other side eased. The knob twisted once more, gently, then let go. Their footsteps retreated down the hall. I waited, holding the door, counting breaths. 5 breaths. 10. 15. The light under the door remained. Then I heard the front door click shut. The light under the bedroom door went out. There was no sound of an engine starting. I stayed where I was for at least another half hour. I know that because when I finally checked my phone again, it said 3:01. My legs ached from holding the door. My arms tingled. The courage that had made me shove the door closed felt like it had leaked out of me. I was left with shaking hands and a raw throat I did not remember straining. I did not open the bedroom door until I saw the first gray light of dawn in the window. When I stepped into the hall, the living room looked almost the same as before. The only difference I saw at first was the guest book sitting open on the coffee table. I moved closer. The last page now had 2 more lines added in the same pressed hard handwriting as the "Do not stay here" warning. One line was dated the night before, with a time written next to it that matched when the headlights first woke me. It said, "Back again." He chose to ignore. Under it, dated that very morning at 2:40, it said he pushed back. My stomach lurched. I flinched away from the book like it might burn my fingers. In the kitchen drawer, the pen that had been tied to the guest book with yarn now lay free. The yarn cut. The cut end was sharp and clean, not frayed. A small knife that had been in the knife block on the counter was gone. I checked the front door. It was unlocked. The keypad still showed the green light from the last entry, as if the door had been opened very recently. Outside, the driveway held fresh tire tracks leading back down the road. The gravel looked disturbed around the path to the crawl space. The padlock hung in place, but when I touched it, the metal loop swung freely. The screw that held the hasp on the door had been pulled half out. The only thing keeping it in place was habit and the appearance that nothing was wrong. I did not stay another night. I packed my bag in 5 minutes, threw it into the car, and drove back the way I came without even making coffee. My phone finally picked up service a few miles from the highway. I pulled over and called the owner. Voicemail. I left a message saying I had left early because someone had been at the cabin. I started to say more, then stopped. It sounded crazy in my own ears. Later that day, the owner called back and sounded genuinely confused. He said I was the first guest in weeks and that no one else had the door code. When I mentioned the guest book entries, he was quiet for a moment, then said he would send someone to check. I do not know if he ever did. A week later, I got a refund request email from the rental site asking if I wanted to review Pine Hollow. I opened the listing. The photos were the same. The description was the same. The guest reviews they showed on the site were all cheerful and bland. No one mentioned anything about headlights at 2 a.m. or someone walking under the house. No one wrote about a stranger who knew the layout of the cabin better than they should. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I had not pushed on that door. If I had stayed in bed and listened to the knob turn and footsteps cross the room. If I had been like the person who wrote that last entry and got their pen yanked away before they could finish the warning. I picture the hooded figure standing in the living room with the guest book open, adding new lines after each stay, watching how people react, seeing who ignores the first sign because it looks like a joke, who laughs off the feeling that something is wrong, who locks the doors and who forgets. And now there is another line in there, written in that same pressed hand, about me. He pushed back. Sometimes that feels like a victory. Other nights, when I wake up and think I hear footsteps in the hall of my own apartment, it feels more like a note of interest. Like I am now, on a list I never agreed to be on, kept in the pages of a book in a cabin at the end of a dirt road, waiting for someone with the code to come back. My name is Tyler, and the cabin I rented last winter sits somewhere off Blackwater Ridge Road in northern Washington. I know the exact coordinates are still saved in my phone, but I have never once let myself look at them again. If I saw the satellite view, if I recognized the clearing or the bend in the trees, I think it would undo whatever thin sense of safety I have left. I chose that place because I wanted silence. I thought I needed a break from everything. The warehouse job, the noise, the constant motion. I booked a 4-night stay at a cabin, listed as remote but comfortable, off-grid but stocked, rustic charm, perfect for writing or reflecting. That was the hook that grabbed me. I wanted to believe in the idea of isolating myself until the world quieted down. The drive started out normal, then turned strange. The highway turned into a 2-lane road, then a 1-lane patchwork of asphalt and dirt, then into something that barely counted as a road at all. The trees changed as I got deeper into the woods, taller and darker, the branches knitting overhead. The GPS kept freezing and reloading. Eventually, it just showed a blue dot floating in a green field, with no road marked at all. The instructions from the host said to look for a wooden sign with a carved bear on it. I nearly missed it. The sign hung crooked from 2 rusted nails, the bear shape weathered until it looked more like a smear. The path beyond it was narrow and full of ruts. My tires slid more than once. I thought about turning around, but something in me insisted on finishing what I started. When the trees finally opened, the cabin was sitting there exactly like the photos. A-frame roof, small porch, a stack of wood under a tarp. No neighbors, no cell service, no sound except wind and my engine. The key was in a lockbox. The door opened easily. Inside smelled like pine and old dust. The place had one main room, with a wood stove, a little kitchenette, and a bedroom in the back. I liked it immediately. It felt simple, safe, like the kind of place I'd always imagined disappearing into for a while. I made a fire. I unpacked. I told myself the silence was good, but something was off from the start. I noticed it maybe an hour after arriving, before the sun went down. There were boot prints in the snow behind the cabin. Not mine, not old either. The edges were sharp. Someone had walked right up to the back wall and stood there for a while. You could see where the snow had compressed more deeply in one place, like the person stopped and stood facing the cabin. Then the tracks led away into the trees. I walked to the tree line and looked. The prints continued, weaving between trunks until they disappeared over a slope. My breath came out in white clouds, and I remember thinking, don't be paranoid. Maybe the owner checked something earlier. But the listing said the place had been empty for weeks. I went back inside, shut the curtains, and put more wood on the fire. I forced myself to eat something and tried to write in the notebook I'd brought, but the words felt thin. I kept glancing at the windows, even though there was nothing to see but the reflection of the room behind me. It had been dark for maybe 2 hours when the first light appeared in the woods. It came from the direction of the slope behind the cabin, a small white glow, bobbing slowly between the tree trunks. For a second, I thought it was someone walking with a flashlight. Then it stopped and stayed perfectly still. I moved to the back window and watched. The light didn't get closer. It didn't fade. It just hovered there. I held my breath, waiting for it to shift again. But it stayed locked in place, like an eye staring through the trees. I tried to remind myself that hunters used headlamps. Hikers sometimes walked at night. Winter campers set up weird lights to guide them home. But even as I told myself those explanations, I knew none of them fit. No one camped out there in that cold. No one walked those ridges at night. And no light I'd ever seen stayed that steady. After maybe 10 minutes, it blinked out. Just gone. I didn't sleep well. Every time I drifted off, I snapped awake thinking I heard something outside. Snow shifting, branches cracking, a faint crunch of footsteps circling the cabin. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was the fire cooling. But around 3 in the morning, I heard something I could not explain away. A dull tap on the bedroom window. One, then another. Soft, slow, as if the person touching the glass didn't want to break it, just wanted to check it. I stared at the window without moving. The curtains were drawn. The tapping stopped after the second one. I waited for a third, but it never came. I didn't open the curtain. I didn't even breathe deeply until the sky outside the cracks of the blinds turned the faintest blue. When morning came, I forced myself to go outside. The cold air hit like needles. The snow behind the cabin was marked up with fresh footprints. One set, one person. The prints went right up to the bedroom window. A full boot print next to a flattened half circle where someone had braced themselves with their hand. You could see the drag of fingertips where they'd tested the glass. I stopped believing my own excuses at that point. I packed my bag even though I had just arrived the afternoon before. I planned to drive back to town and tell the host something was wrong with the property, that someone was using the woods behind the cabin. Watching, I loaded my bag in the front seat and reached for the ignition. The engine rumbled, then died. I tried again. It turned over once, weakly, then nothing. I looked under the hood. I'm not a mechanic, but even I could tell something was wrong with the battery cables. They weren't loose. They were cut, clean through. Someone had disabled my car overnight. I walked back to the porch and sat down because my legs felt like they weren't going to hold me. I kept staring at the trees, waiting for the bobbing white light again. It didn't appear. The woods looked dead and still. That was somehow worse. I tried my phone. No bars. Not even a flicker. For a long time, I stood in the doorway of the cabin trying to decide whether to stay inside or run for the road. The road was 1.5 miles away. The sun had barely risen. If someone had been close enough last night to tap on the window and cut my battery cables, then they could still be out there in any direction. In the end, I chose the cabin. It had a door I could lock. A fire. Walls. Not much, but more than the woods. I stacked furniture in front of the doors. I pushed the little table under the back doorknob. I pulled all the curtains tight. I kept the fire going even though it filled the cabin with dry heat. The idea of letting the flames die made my skin crawl. Hours passed. The sky dimmed again. The shadows took over the corners of the room. I listened for footsteps, for breathing, for anything. It was around 5 in the afternoon when I saw the second light. Not behind the cabin this time. This one was in front, down the path that led deeper into the forest. A pale shape moving behind the trees. It didn't sway like the earlier one. It pulsed, not in a rhythmic way, more like it was breathing. Once, twice, then stillness. I watched from between the curtains and realized the light wasn't coming from a flashlight pointed toward me. It was reflected light. The glow was catching on something. Someone, maybe a shoulder, maybe a face. Whatever it was tall enough that the light hit it above the ground line of the brush. I backed away from the window. Every instinct in my body screamed to hide, to run, to do anything except stand in the open. The cabin creaked. The boards in the porch groaned. I froze. Something was stepping onto the porch. Slow, heavy, deliberate. One step, then stillness that stretched, like it was listening. I didn't hear tapping this time. I heard breathing. Not loud, not ragged, just the controlled breath of someone standing directly on the other side of the wood door. I grabbed the fire poker from beside the stove and held it like a weapon, even though my hands were shaking so badly that the metal clinked against the stones. The breathing stopped. Then the doorknob moved. Not a violent twist, not a sudden rattling, just a slow testing pressure, as if someone were easing their hand around it to see how far it would turn. It stopped at the lock. Then a whisper of movement, a shift of weight on the porch boards, a faint drag, like a boot slipping slightly on wet wood. Then silence. I didn't move for hours. I kept the poker in my hand until my fingers cramped around it. I waited until the fire burned down to embers and still didn't dare get up to add wood. Every sound felt amplified, every shadow too deep. At some point, exhaustion forced me into a half-sleep. I don't know how long I was out, minutes maybe. When I woke, the fire was almost dead. The room was cold. My breath showed in the air. Then I heard the crunch of snow, not on the porch, not behind the cabin, right under the bedroom window. A slow rhythm, a step, a pause, another step, closer each time. I held my breath until my lungs ached. I waited for the tapping again, for the breathing, something, anything. Instead, the window latch clicked. It was so quiet that at first I thought I had imagined it, but then it clicked again. A tiny metallic sound. Someone was trying the latch from the outside. I moved into the corner of the bedroom and crouched so low that my knees burned. My entire body shook so hard I had to bite down on my sleeve to stop my teeth from clattering. The latch clicked a third time, then a gentle push on the glass. The frame creaked, then nothing. Not footsteps leaving, not breath, just nothing. I stayed in that corner until I saw daylight through the curtains. When I finally stood, my legs were numb and my back screamed. Outside the bedroom window, the snow was disturbed again. The prints were deeper this time. No handprint, no fingertips. Whoever it was had stood so close, the snow around the foundation was packed almost flat. I didn't bother with my things. I didn't eat. I didn't drink. I left the fire dead. I stepped into the freezing air and ran. I followed the snowy path until I reached the road. I didn't stop until I saw another car. A woman driving a pickup slowed when she saw me waving like a madman. She let me in. I must have looked half feral, but she didn't question it. She drove me all the way into town. The sheriff's department sent 2 deputies to check. They found the footprints. They found the cut battery cables. They found pry marks under the bedroom window. They found nothing else. No tracks leading away. No signs of who it was. Just a set of prints that circled the cabin again and again and again. The host refunded the entire trip and removed the listing temporarily. He said the last guest before me reported hearing something outside but brushed it off. He assumed animals. He told me no one else had keys. I'm home now, but I keep waking at night, thinking I hear snow crunching under a window, thinking I see a faint pulsing light between the trees across the street, thinking if I let myself sleep too deeply, I'll wake up to the sound of a latch clicking. When I close my eyes, all I can picture is that single boot print under the window. How deep it was. How still the person must have been standing there in the dark, waiting for the right moment.